in Los Angeles. If you'd like to read my columns in the Messenger, the best way to get at them is muckrack.com. That's muckrack, all one word, .com, /Brad Bannon. My company, Bannon Communications Research, polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. BannonCR.com is the sponsor of today's show. Mondays on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward. With us today, as always, is our intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. He's on the boards to make sure the show runs on time and stays online. We've got a couple of great guests today. In the first half hour, Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA, joins us to discuss politics, the impact of the Gaza crisis and the speaker crisis on campaign 2024. In the second half hour, Bob Deans, strategic director of strategic engagement for the Natural Resources Defense Council, joins us to discuss the upcoming UN-sponsored climate conference coming up next month in Dubai. Before we get to our first guest, though, we're going to play this clip, and it's Dick Cheney. It is Liz Cheney. About her father, Liz Cheney, on threats to GOP lawmakers from Jim Jordan while he was running for Speaker.
What do you think is driving the domestic threats against lawmakers within the Republican Party and also among some Democrats?
The domestic threats are absolutely being driven by Donald Trump and unfortunately some of his supporters who, in fact, have encouraged and taken steps that have resulted in, as we saw on January 6th, political violence. When you have a member of Congress, reportedly, like Warren Davidson from Ohio, who in the meeting with Jim Jordan last week, when some of the holdouts raised with Jordan the fact that they were getting death threats, one of them told me that in response, Congressman Davidson said, well, that's not Jim Jordan's fault, that's your fault for voting against him. That is the kind of encouragement and acceptance of violence that is absolutely has no place in this party, should have no place in our country.
Yep, that was Liz Cheney talking about the threats that were made on behalf of Jim Jordan's late and failed Speaker candidacy. Our guest today in this half hour is Sarah Jones, who is the editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Sarah's Twitter handle is Politicus Sarah, that's POLITICUS SARAH. And if you want to check out Politicus USA, you can do it at politicususa.com. Sarah, welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We're always glad to have you on.
Thank you, Brad. It's so good to be here, and I'm loving your new column home. Very nice. At the Messenger. Yeah.
We'll get to that. I want you to talk about something I wrote about in my latest Messenger column. And again, if you'd like to read them, you can always check them out at muckrack.com. That's muckrack, all one word, .com /Brad Bannon. Let me ask you first, what do you make of the fight for Speaker in the House? Today, late last week, Jim Jordan failed in his quest for the speakership, thank God, after 3 rounds of ballots, which, and it's interesting, he did progressively worse on each ballot. Was a trending direction for old Jim, and even he saw the light of day after a while. Tonight, apparently the last time I checked, we had 9 Republican House members who are running for Speaker. I believe they're going to have some kind of debate tonight, and who knows, maybe have a vote tomorrow. Sarah, would you like to weigh in on the Speaker's fight?
Well, first of all, I think we should not breeze over, and it's good that you played that clip, the rising violence and that is now turning in on itself. This violence is largely happening within the MAGA extremism part of the Republican Party. It is turning in on itself, and this extremism is not only a danger to Republicans, and there were Republican lawmakers whose wives and children wives were getting threats and children had to have security at their school. This is a threat to our republic, and this is a threat to democracy. You can't have people afraid to take a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives for a speaker who are being ruled by fear and intimidation and threats. That's all how that Trump has basically taken hold of the Republican Party. And I also think that this is more Democratic backsliding and is moving towards autocracy. What does it say politically about Republicans? I think you might agree with me that it seems like Republicans can pretty much do anything. If you look at their slate of speaker candidates, for example, very few have supported democracy. They don't have good grades.
You're right. Of the 9 speaker candidates, 7 of them voted to just decertify the results of the 2020 election.
Right, and we're not seeing leadership of the kind that would have courage to vote, to impeach Donald Trump, for example, after the insurrection. So these are not people who should be in any position in a democracy. They shouldn't be in a leadership position. But this has been going on in the Republican Party for 30 years. I wrote about that for my Substack this morning, that this history of chaos and dysfunction, and what we're seeing now is kind of, this is the culmination of 30 years of effort to take power when it isn't given to them by the voters. And that's the gerrymandering of the districts, for example, is why we have this extremism. Because I think people I know when I do like a show on the BBC or something, and they're kind of, how could they not side eye us? What is going on over there? And it's hard to explain that these loud voices of extremism that represent the people in the U.S. House of Representatives actually don't represent the people. Oftentimes, they're in these super gerrymandered districts. Jim Jordan himself is a prime example of that. So I don't see that this is going to hurt the Republicans the way that it would in a real democracy where there weren't all this corruption of our political processes. But I also have been seeing the media a little bit shifting and starting to hold Republicans accountable and not letting them blame Democrats for the violent threats that they're getting. Because I've seen them try to conflate that and get called out. That isn't very much, but I don't think that it's going to be great for them to go into an election where they're branded as this party of, threats.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so, Sarah. I watched the Republicans. Donald Trump is facing trial, I don't know, on dozens of indictments. I think I saw the number 91 somewhere. I don't know if that's accurate, but it's a lot, whatever it is. You watch the Republicans in the House who have proved, beyond doubt they're incapable of governing. I mean, essentially, we talk about the government shutdown that's coming on November 15th, but for all intents and purposes, the United States government has shut down. And it's shut down because the Republicans can't get their act together, even internally.
Exactly. And day 20 without a speaker.
Day 20 without a speaker. Yeah. I talked to a reporter who covers the House Republicans today. And, I asked her, are we going to have a speaker this week? And I almost thought for sure she'd say yes. And she said, I don't know. This is crazy. And you would think that, they've proved totally incapable of governing. And do you think this is going to have a lasting effect? I'm going to actually Sarah, I'm going to ask you this question because we have to take a short break for our radio listeners, and I want to stop you in mid-answer. This is Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We are now going to take a short break to give our radio listeners a little vacation, but we're going to stick with folks who are watching us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll be back right after this very short break for our video watchers.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is an old friend, not an old friend,
Well, yeah.
a friend who's been a friend for a long time. Sarah Jones, who's editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. If you want to check out Sarah's work, her Twitter handle is Politicus Sarah. That's POLITICUS SARAH, all one word. And the website is politicus.com. So let me get into this. I watch what happens. The Republicans' futile battle to elect a speaker, Donald Trump's legal problems, and why in the heck aren't Americans rushing to support Democrats?
Well, I think I wish I knew. First of all, I honestly, every time we have, we're trying to put all these pieces together, I always come back to the media. You see the way they present this stuff, and it's always like, oh, these two sides can't get along. And that's not what's happening. In fact, I think the speaker crisis really showed that Democrats wanted this bipartisan coalition, and they were willing to work with a reasonable Republican. The Republicans could not put forth a reasonable Republican. So that is, very clear where the problem is coming from. And then to be led by Donald Trump, and for anyone to be unclear about where the problem is coming from, that's baffling to me. And I think it's really disingenuous. I mean, at this point, I think it's dishonest, actually, and very harmful for democracy. We don't know that people are not shifting toward Democrats. And I think it's interesting. And as a poller, how much matters, how much is impacted by how questions are framed, and what kind of questions people ask. But I also think that the kinds of things that are going to move people. Remember, before 2022, everyone was saying, oh, abortion, that's not going to matter, and these election denial stuff's not going to matter. But both of those issues were, in fact, the driving forces, bipartisan, on both sides. They drove people to support Democrats. And I don't even think that, I think people aren't comfortable saying, oh, I'm going to support Democrats. Maybe Republicans and even independents, but that might be where they are leaning as they see these threats of violence increasing, and all of Donald Trump's legal. I mean, let's not forget, all of that's going to be center stage. We have no idea what that's going to do to independents.
Okay, we're going to take another short break here so we can bring back our radio listeners. This is Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus.com. We're going to continue to talk about the impact of Republican chaos and world chaos on the 2024 election campaign. We'll be right back after these messages, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. We're here talking about domestic politics. In the second half hour, we're going to have Bob Deans from the Natural Resources Defense Council talk about environmental policy. And Sarah, I'm going to ask you this question. The world is in chaos. We've got a proxy war going on with the Russians in Ukraine. We've got a proxy war in the Middle East. Yeah, and between the two of those, if you watch the network news every night, which I do faithfully, despite the fact I can't stand watching it, it's just that's occupies all the coverage. And in the second half hour, I'm going to ask Bob Deans whether or not all this focus on world conflict is just dampening the voter attention towards the environmental crisis we face. And I'm going to ask a slightly different version of the question to you. And, it seems to me Joe Biden's biggest challenge between now and Election Day 2024 is to make the sale on the economy. He hasn't yet. CNBC released a poll last week that showed his job rating for handling the economy was only his approval for handling the economy was only 33%. And it seems to me if Democrats are going to do well, if Joe Biden's getting reelected, he's going to have to make the sale on the economy, which he hasn't done yet. How can he do that?
Well, he's out there doing it all the time, and I don't understand why it hasn't resonated with people. I've never seen a president work harder to create jobs, and I've been covering a lot of the White House briefings on those different pushes that they're doing. I mean, they're constantly, every couple of days, there's a new announcement about here's these tech hubs and here's these, other, whatever it is, it's always to create good paying jobs, and they're working, trying to get labor agreements for these work because they're working with private companies. They can't always guarantee that. But so I see him out there making this case. The economy's doing, you look at how the economy is covered and how when their unemployment is low, the media will say, oh, this is really bad, because markets don't like this. What if we shift that lens and we start talking about the economy from the point of view of most Americans, working Americans, and how they don't really care how the market is doing. They care that they can pay their mortgage and pay their groceries. I think that so much of our perspective on the economy is so focused on how big corporations are doing and what the wealthy think about it instead of how the people at home are doing. And I don't know what else, Joe Biden's out here constantly and Kamala Harris is out and all of their other, they've got all the other proxies sort of for them making this case, visiting cities around the country constantly. And why isn't it resonating with people? I really don't know. I think it's very strange. And it may be that people aren't focused on the economy right now because everything is, better than it was. Interest rates are higher and that's making people maybe not happy. But, I don't have this great answer for that. I think it's this huge hole.
Well, I hope the Biden administration figures it out because what they've done so far, they have not made the sale or even come close to making the sale. And I don't know the answer either. I wish I did. But, even in times of international crisis, Americans vote their pocketbooks. And at this point, if that happens, Democrats are going to be in big trouble. And I agree with you, Paul. We're a year or more than 12 months out. We're about 12 and a half months out from the presidential election. And I hope things change because it's going to be big problems. I can actually see a situation now, and I really hate to say this, but Americans are just so fed up with life in general. I could see very much all three electoral branches of the federal government changing hands. The White House and the Senate going from Democrat to Republican, and the House going from Republican to Democratic. If we had an election today, I think that's how things would go. But you're right. Polls are snapshots in times. The Biden administration still has a year to work on this, but they better get on their horse because we're facing big problems. I also want to mention, as I should have coming out of the break, that for our radio listeners out there, if you'd like to see us, well, maybe no one wants to see me, but if you want to see our guest as well as listen to them, you can check out our video broadcast on twitter.com /Brad Bannon or on facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Okay, I was reading something this morning that I want to ask you about, Sarah, because it troubled me. Last week, we had a rabbi at a synagogue killed by an unknown assailant. We had a Palestinian boy of Palestinian descent, 5-year-old boy of Palestinian descent, killed. This is all in the wake of the troubles in the Mideast. What's happening to our country? I mean, it's, people are just randomly shooting each other. Violence is taking over. What's the problem here?
I think that the divisions and the hatred and the rising violent rhetoric has poisoned our country. And I think the divisions are so strong now. And then you see how every single tragedy is exploited. And to go into the 3 examples that you just gave, and I like to focus for a minute on the Detroit area. I'm from Detroit, and to see the NBC did this article about the Muslims in Dearborn, they're not going to vote for Biden.
Yes.
And one of the people they quoted was actually a Republican who didn't vote for Biden in the first place. But one of the ugly things that's been happening, Detroit has always been this absolutely amazing melting pot community where they have one of the largest populations of Muslims and a very large population of Jewish people living very close together. And what's happened, Republicans went into Dearborn and into Hamtramck, and before the 2022 elections, they were pushing these extremist anti-LGBTQ messages about, the school boards with all of that business that we still see them doing. And it did take root for some people. And so I see that, and that's not a message about here's what we stand for as a party. That's pushing hate and radicalizing people and extremism. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing.
Sarah, I'm going to have to cut you off because unfortunately we're run out of time. Guest in this half hour has been Sarah Jones, editor-in-chief of Politicus USA. Always glad to have Sarah on the show, and I'm sure we'll be seeing her again soon. We'll be back.